Okay, good afternoon and welcome to the CERIAS seminar this afternoon. I would like to introduce Luke Butcher. Luke Butcher comes from us from MasterCard, where he's a product management for cyber and intelligence solutions. So he's going to talk a little bit about connected intelligence. You can see artificial intelligence on the screen, so I think this will be an interesting talk for you. I didn't notice his whistle and red card, but he is a longtime soccer official. So if anybody gets out of line, you'll probably get given the red card. So I just thought I'd give you that little bit of forewarning. So with that, I'll just turn it over to Luke.
Perfect. Thank you, Jerry. Yes, and I will kick off and talk today a little bit about what artificial intelligence and its application looks like MasterCard today and where we envision it going. And that's kind of the piece that I talk about, a connected data, a repository, at least of joined data where you can leverage algorithms to pick up themes and contexts. The other piece that I'll talk about a little bit later is the value of fragmented or decentralized data. So MasterCard, at its core, its bread and butter, is a network connecting someone who's looking to have a good or service to someone who's able to provide it. So taking that mindset, that paradigm, and applying it into a identity space. So we'll get there in the second half. So the first piece is around artificial intelligence within MasterCard. So this is not a foreign concept to MasterCard. We've had data scientists and people working in a artificial intelligence niche for many years. Traditionally, it's been in a fraud capacity. So every time that card is swiped, used online, a risk score is generated and sent to our bank partners to help them make a decision on whether it's a genuine user or not, or it's someone who has taken over those credentials. So it's been a fairly niche part of our organization. It's certainly an important part, but a niche part of our organization. And we're now at this stage where we really need to work across the business to help the rest of the business that traditionally hasn't had to touch artificial intelligence, didn't have to understand artificial intelligence, and really bring them up to speed. Because we are at this point where we see a lot of value and potential in this space, but you really need the business owners who understand their day-to-day life, the problems of the business that they face, and for them to have enough understanding of artificial intelligence to see the application. And conversely, you need that side of the business to be able to educate those with the skills to develop the relevant applications and algorithms to understand the problems of the business, to really find some middle ground to even find some of these case studies. And why is this kind of a priority? So this is how across the organization is really thinking and seeing the application of artificial intelligence. We consider it kind of the third digital transformation across the industry, across the ecosystem. And when we talk about a transformation, that means, from our standpoint, it's a change that goes beyond the institutions that you traditionally think about it. So in the 1980s, when we talk about the proliferation of computers, right, that was not just a transformation that impacted the Microsofts, the Apples of the world. It's hard to imagine a single company, organization, school that doesn't have a computer today to maximize the potential and productivity of the workforce, students, anyone who's a part of that, those institutions. That kind of next wave is the internet. If you had kind of gone a few years prior and speaking to individual consumers, kind of hard to have any of them say with any degree of certainty or confidence that they would ever make a purchase without seeing, feeling, and trying something on. And yet we still have the Zappos and the Amazons who are not just entering a space, but potentially are currently transforming what retail looks like in today's edge. So that's really what we mean by transformation, of really redefining of everyone who has to play in this economy. And finally, we get to this proliferation of artificial intelligence. When you're able to predict better, it has meaningful impacts to the bottom lines and the decisions that these organizations make. And we think we're at the very cusp of that, and it's part of why it's a heightened importance to MasterCard. So why now and why for MasterCard? So the real value of artificial intelligence all the way from machine learning to a deep learning perspective comes as these three pieces kind of feed off of each other and each of them really grow. So you really don't have the scale and vast amount of data to really leverage deep learning until relatively recently. So as you get data from your traditional sources, as you get data from things like the Internet of Things and new forms of technology, and you start to be able to correlate all these different forms of technology around a centralized user, is just one example or application. It's a new fodder space for these institutions to play in. With more data, you really can't do much with it if you don't have the processing power behind it. So from a MasterCard perspective, we have had a trove of processing power, but traditionally have not been harnessing it for algorithms and artificial intelligence historically. It has been on processing transactions globally, managing to service level agreements that are not measured in seconds or even milliseconds. Like we're talking even fractions of that. So that's looking at new ways of applying what we've historically had a very high degree of competency in historically. And then all of that too feeds into better algorithms, right? If you've got enough data and enough processing power, you're able to apply those two together and really make something of it. And then the graph on the right of the slide came from one of Google's co-founders of the Google Brain, which is there is a diminishing margin of return when it comes definitely to human learning, to no one's surprise. You can, as much incremental data as you add in there, there's only going to be so much incremental value you'll generate out. Machine learning really relies on the structures that you're able to place on that incremental data. So there too is a diminishing margin of return. Deep learning is really where we expect that diminishing margin to not be in the foreseeable future, and really part of that proliferation of artificial intelligence transforming not just our industry, but almost virtually every industry across our economy. Now, so for some of the fun pieces, the application of it today within MasterCard. So today we've identified around 130 different use cases and use cases for it within MasterCard. I touched upon a little bit around fraud detection. So our banks report in fraud to us, and historically we've used that fraud data and correlated to transactional level trends to estimate and try and predict what type of risk vectors translate into fraud. Now we're starting to be a little more sophisticated in how we think about this. So when we talk about risk vectors generating fraud, that's a fairly, to kind of reduce it a bit, is a straight line level of fraud reported in based on trends. But as we think about different cardholders, there will be very natural anomalies in this space that are not due to ingenuine or bad behavior. So an Elon Musk of the world, his very profile on spending habits, levels of spend are on their own going to look like a very risky transaction. If he's traveling a lot outside of a general geographic radius that most cardholders tend to spend within 30 to 40 miles of their home, he's traveling a lot, the size of the purchases he's making, those alone tend to represent fraudulent transactions. But when you can break out those individual entities and people and understand, no, we don't really know who Elon Musk is, but we can associate for that card, that's what genuine activity represents, and to take that understanding and apply it to what has been traditionally kind of a straight line model of what's been reported and what are our traditional fraud vectors. Next application is in finance. So all public companies report their quarterly returns, and then there's a lot of hoopla around the year-end returns. A lot of business decisions, operating decisions, go into whether they miss or make their forecast. Although I can't help but chuckling a little bit that that forecast is imperfect. So as accurate as they can be with the tools and resources that they have before them, that forecast is only as good as the people and the drivers that they've placed into that model. And this is certainly not a foreign concept to MasterCard as well. So understanding and being able to apply AI into an organization, picking up on drivers that haven't historically been measured, really pulling that into a forecast that goes out to the street is going to produce more reliable, more accurate forecasting for many of these businesses that, hard to say how often it happens, but may just be missing or beating their numbers just because they forecasted quite poorly, which has an impact to anyone who chooses to invest in the stock market. Next one is within human resources. For those of you who have not gone through the process of being hired or being an intern, there are a lot of steps that a company goes through to vet someone. There's the understanding what someone's experience is on paper. There are the interviews by teammates and team members and hiring managers, on whether they think that candidate will be a good fit on a team. There are companies that are going through trend analysis and making sure that keywords are put into a resume. That is just a very easy system to beat. You just look up what those keywords are and you apply them to the paper. So it's very difficult, and we'll save any horror stories in that arena for later, but it's very difficult to really match up a person who has the right experience and is a good fit and has a lot of potential within a company to those open job roles and postings. And part of that is because people have to do that evaluation and make their best judgment. But if you could start to apply artificial intelligence to this, start really applying it across their experiences, across how they potentially perform in an interview and the responses that they give. Maybe there are some things that we are not picking up on that would actually be far better indicators than anything we've used historically. Product recommender and from a sales standpoint. Now, one a little close to my heart. Within MasterCard, we have, across our core products, our value-add service products, and our consulting arm, around 300 different products. People are imperfect, and it's very hard to fathom being able to teach a whole sales force that many different products. So it's one, understanding the products, what they do, and the value that they can add. Two, it's also understanding where the application of those products are within a customer. So it's really marrying and joining those two up. And what happens in reality is you get a sales force who's fairly familiar with a subset of those products. If you're lucky, it's going to be somewhere in the camp of 20 to 30. If you're unlucky, we're probably looking at 5 to 10. But they are very good and are at applying and understanding where that can go within a customer to help their business driver. But if you applied a little bit of understanding of the data that's coming in from these customers, whether they are banks, whether they are merchants and retailers, or providers and supporters of those two entities, if you can understand their businesses, understand the product lines, you've now honed in and facilitated for the sales force what they really need to be focusing on and learning. So instead of giving them a huge menu of 300 to 400 products, you give them, let's say, 5 to 10 every quarter and say, we think that these are the ideal recommended solutions. Go up, read on them, have customer conversations, and from there, for those that work, great. For those that don't, move on. But you're having very tactical and very meaningful conversations that make the most of everyone's time. Certainly the MasterCard sales force and sales forces across the globe who struggle with the same thing, but also from a customer standpoint. You're not weeding through many iterations of a conversation to find out that this really doesn't make sense and didn't really have a chance from the get-go. You're really looking to expedite and facilitate the conversations to something that's a little more meaningful and tangible. Log analysis from our audit teams. Historically, audit has been a very manual process, trying to identify what is going to be a red flag, what is a warning sign that really needs to be followed up on to determine if it's a red flag or not, and those instances that are just really nothing to worry about. But it's a process that people continue to invest millions in because of the risk. And our legal arm is certainly not at risk of job security because of this, but the applications of artificial intelligence and understanding what red flags we knew of historically and finding and catching them sooner, as well as ones we had never identified before, and really applying that to our business and getting ahead of a curve of something that could be potentially quite dangerous or disastrous, or at least quite costly to an organization. The final one is social media trend analysis. So MasterCard is a B2B organization. We, despite that brand on the front of the card, we tend to be behind the scenes and try to keep it that way. The problem with that is we don't have firsthand reactions or insights into what's necessarily happening with cardholders. So if something fails and something goes wrong, and for some reason our redundant systems and platforms didn't catch it, didn't pick up on it, for whatever reason, we have to really rely on consumer sentiment to catch these problems, which is not a great way to run a business. Because the way this works is something goes wrong. Cardholder looks to make a transaction and it doesn't go through. That's the voice of one. Calls into a bank, complains about it, probably nothing else happens. Now maybe dozens it happens to, and ideally at this point, the bank says, okay, actually there is a problem. Let me reach out to MasterCard. Likely, it's dozens on dozens, if not hundreds of people who are impacted before a problem and firestorm is created. So where we can get ahead, where we can understand, where we can catch these trends even faster without relying on intermediary parties to catch it for us, the better. Again, where we can be proactive on these front lines really helps us get ahead of the curve, mitigate costs from remediation and damages that we need to resolve, and allows us a little more time and flexibility in fixing problems before they escalate. And this is just kind of a summary slide on, it's machine learning is really not taking away anyone's jobs. It's just really transforming them and changing what they mean. So it really takes individuals who understand the business, understand the problems, to be able to apply that and see the opportunities within artificial intelligence to make everyone's lives better. And it's also on the flip side, those with the technical skills to operationalize it, to understand the business, to find where those applications are. So that's really artificial intelligence within MasterCard. So that you can only draw correlations and causations when you have all the data at your fingertips, or at least have needles out there to pick up on it. However, mentioned a bit earlier that MasterCard's bread and butter is actually just being a network and connecting multiple parties to each other. And there is still a lot of value in that. There is a lot of value in not being a honeypot of information, being a prime source or target for that. And one of those chief opportunities we see in this is around digital identity. And there's a few trends that are driving this. One is identity verification upon setup. So this could be everything from new bank accounts that you need to set up for. You need to verify who you are when you register for school, for classes. You need to register for this when we talk about a gig economy. I sure want to be confident that the Lyfts and Ubers of the world have done some form of check before I'm getting into a car with someone driving at 60 miles per hour. there is the expectation, right? It's a digital space in which you're verifying your identity. There's a consumer expectation that it's seamless, it's secure, and it's a very private experience. We've certainly seen a few institutions misuse that information before. So how do you help maintain that consumer trust when you're trying to verify their identity across a few organizations? There's also this idea that connected devices is not making this job any easier with the Alexas, the Google Homes in the world. Those have even fewer ways of being able to identify a person who they say they are. But you can make purchases on those devices. Shortly, they'll be able to make financial decisions, logging into banks, making high-risk transactions, and understanding who you are is going to be crucial for those devices. The other one is around regulation. So GDPR, for those who are not familiar, is a European regulation around putting control of a consumer's data into their hands. So at its core, a consumer can go to any institution, from a bank to a merchant who's holding their data, and say, I don't want you to be holding any, I don't want you to have any of the historical data that you have on me to be making decisions either broadly or about me specifically. But there's, on the converse side, there's also this idea of leveling a playing field. It's very difficult for a startup or a new institution or an old institution who just hasn't historically had access to this data come into a space when they're a newcomer, right? A bank, a credit scoring agency are these stalwarts who have had and been able to look at this data for years, decades. Someone who's new and wants to offer new services, a new way to score credit, is never going to be able to compete if we've kind of centralized all this data into a group of a few institutions and given them a lot of power. I will pick and choose some of these so we don't iterate through each one of these. The 7.5 billion user. So on one side, India did an amazing thing in nationalizing their identity platform for all of their citizens. So historically, the base of the pyramid are the ones who are most unlikely to be able to identify themselves digitally, but they're also the ones who are most likely to need whatever they are verifying their identity for. That infrastructure, those social services, those are the platforms that those at that base of the pyramid struggle to connect with, are the ones who also need it the most. So India did a phenomenal thing, registered all their citizens, got biometric data on them, but it also prevents, it's also a risk, right? That the government now holds a very rich repository of information that is an absolute gold mine and honeypot that they have to be very careful with now going forward, and making sure that they are very secure in how they manage that data, the third parties that have access to it, and the third parties that need to use that data to verify those individuals. So it certainly provides a risk in that space. So not surprisingly, we expect that our vision of digital identity to be something that's very simple, something very accessible. In today's day and age, most have a smartphone, but especially my India example, not always. But providing some form of infrastructure or access to this that's simple, safe. But what's also unique is giving the consumer more say and more control in how they do it. So I'll probably spend most of the time on this piece, which is really how we envision this operating and working. So in the middle, there are two entities. One is the customer, who's got this need to identify and verify themselves, either for the first time or on an ongoing basis, depending on the relationship that they have. The second is MasterCard sees itself there as the connector of all these different institutions. So we do not want to be this honeypot. We merely want to be the rails connecting these institutions. So we'll be the rails. We'll create a uniform and standardized process for an exchange of this information, but we really don't want to hold it don't want to have access to this and be our own honeypot. We've got certainly enough problems with people trying to penetrate our systems today. We're not really looking to add even more fuel to the fire. So it might make sense to walk through a example of this, walking through each of these players. Selfishly, since I'm up here speaking, I'm going to choose one that I had to go through just a few hours ago. Renting a car. Hertz only needed when I went online to register and book a car, Hertz really only needs one piece of information. Am I older than 25 or not? And traditionally today, the way you answer that is by giving them your birthday. Now Hertz has extra information than they actually even needed. They don't really care about it, but now they have created a lucrative source of data that's used in opening up accounts and all sorts of pieces of information. But the question in this framework is, could Hertz just ask if you're older than 25 or not caring whether you're 80 or 26? And so the way we envision this being is Hertz is this relying party. It's relying on information from other providers in the ecosystem. Could Hertz just connect with potentially your bank and say, Citibank, Bank of America, is Luke older than 25? Answer is just a yes, no. It's dichotomous. It's not something that they need to store on their side. So you've got some form of trust provider. That could be a bank. That could be a mobile network operator, a cell phone provider. Many of those institutions could provide that. It could also be something that's less significant and you don't need to go to that extreme, right? It could be around social media, right? And making sure that you've got some other entity of information that's less secure and not as necessary because the risk isn't as high there. So you've now got an entity who said, yep, I verified that piece of information. What you still need, though, is someone to say, Luke is who they say they are. Because it's just as easy to just verify a piece of information without verifying that person is who they say they are. So that's where the identity verification provider, again, could be a mobile network operator who's known you for many, many years. Could be a government that holds everything from birth certificates to social security numbers to say, yep, Luke is who he says he is. That way you can trust the bank's information that he's older than 25. And right there, you've had a exchange of information that is distributed, doesn't create honeypots on any side of it, but has provided all the information and nothing more than is needed. So that's kind of our vision of what digital identity looks like going forward, that we're looking to start really ramping up and scaling early and throughout next year. So two pieces on this slide. If this is of interest, we can also certainly circulate it after this class. We've got a public white paper on this that is far more specific and detailed than I can be in a short class. So that's out there and accessible. And the other piece is, MasterCard is not the only player who's trying to solve this problem, and everyone has their own pillars. So we've got 10. Many of them are fairly similar to what other providers are looking to do out in the ecosystem. One that is a little different that we see ourselves standing apart on and would ideally like others who are looking to solve the same problem also include is this idea of inclusion. Right? Those who need the access to this, who need to verify, who struggle to do this the most, tend to be the ones who need whatever services that they are verifying for. This is not a new piece for MasterCard. We also have our own kind of charitable organization that's apart from the business that looks to broaden financial inclusion, really providing access to financial systems to those who haven't had it before, which breaks the systems around loan sharks and really perpetuating poverty in that ecosystem. So we're taking that same pillar from there and applying it to digital identity. And then finally, I kind of just picked on one one use case, but we see a plethora of use cases for digital identity. So I'll start with the seamless travel because that's where the example I picked up on. But so it applies to a rental car, it applies to airlines, hotels. All of those need to verify a person is who they say they are, and in the process likely take on more information than they really need and quite candidly probably want. Right below that is age-related sales. So traditionally this is around alcohol and looking to make those types of purchases, but they're not the only ones. There are definitely other purchases out there that require age verification. The other is around very personal and sensitive information, whether it's legal documents, trusts and estates, stuff that still gets delivered in paper form, and making sure that they get delivered to who they are supposed to without creating too much of a burden or ownership on those trying to deliver or receive that information. There's also background checks. So in a sharing economy, those who need to be a part of a gig economy, verifying who they say they are, the amount of income, and income would also apply to rent and mortgages and all that fun stuff. There's also that high risk identity verification. So new bank accounts, applying for a passport for the first time, applying for a driver's license, those key pillars of who you say you are, someone needs to verify that for the first time and be pretty sure that you are who you say you are. KYC, applying for credits, loans, financial things. The other piece is you think about healthcare. For those of you who are lucky enough to not know this example, it's great. But when you need to share information across healthcare providers so that they can make a single and hopefully agreeable diagnosis, it's very hard to share that information just around the privacy laws and regulation that exist in that space. So if you can simplify the identity verification, you can facilitate that exchange between multiple providers. And then when we call it digital identity, but there's also quite a few applications of face-to-face that are arising where it is a face-to-face exchange, but the data and verification happens in a digital medium. So when we think, it's a large problem with people's Amazons, been a long day. People's Amazon packages just being taken off the stoop and doorstep. So Amazon's looking at new ways to provide those packages in a secure manner. Sometimes that's putting it in the trunk of your BMW or your Audi. It's going into a section of a house that's been verified or cornered off, but still locked off except for one specific moment when a package is being delivered. It's a face-to-face interaction, but whoever's there, whoever's present, needs to be verified via a digital medium, not through some key that's already been exchanged historically. So that's kind of the value and where we're looking from a decentralized standpoint and see a lot of value coming from on the data front. So, very broadly, those are two vastly different applications that MasterCard is very excited and pursuing for quite wholeheartedly. Shareholders are also equally excited about both of these spaces because they represent quite a lot of need as well as potential for the organization. So I've done quite a bit of talking. I will turn it over to any questions that anyone has in either of these two spaces. It's either a sign that I did that very well or very poorly.
I'm wondering who else is doing this type of digital life sort of platform that you're going towards, because you talked about other people and well, so I'm just curious who else are doing that.
Yeah, so there are quite a few startups who think they've got a new view or a few perception in this space that they're certainly trudging forward with it. So you've got that end of the spectrum. But you've also got, not really governments, they're just kind of behind the curve, but you've got people who have this rich data who actually exhibit a lot of potential in this space. So the mobile network operators of the world are looking to do this. And you've also got entities kind of in between who struggle with this problem, but also could be part of the solution to it. So without naming anyone, entities who have a lot of rich data on your social media, for instance, are also starting to explore, do they tackle this space directly, or do they work with entities like MasterCard or some of these other providers in a shared ecosystem? So without naming names, it's kind of a wide swath of organizations looking to solve this problem.
In the future, do you see blockchain technology moving into this space in part?
It's a fair question.
Not financially, but just in information sharing.
Absolutely. So not covered today, but we certainly have a whole group who's working on blockchain and its varying applications. So to your point, I'm tempted to jump the gun and talk about payment, but there is definitely application for it in a digital exchange. So when we talk about how this data is shared and the mediums it's shared, I will not, make forward-looking statements, but a medium for that could be blockchain, right? And standardizing the protocols that these different institutions are using to exchange that information. So the applications and how this gets executed we're not limiting ourselves in any regard within that space.
Okay, anything else? If not, let's thank our speaker. Thanks, Luke.
Perfect. Thank you, everyone.